Alrighty. Cool. Alright, hello everyone. My name is Wesley, this is Wu Can Cook. Today we're cooking a dan dan mian, which is a peanut sauce noodle, or actually it's a sesame sauce noodle that we're doing today. It's loosely inspired off of a dan dan mian that you can find at a spot here in Oakland called Good to Eat Dumplings, which, contrary to their name, they actually have really good noodles in addition to their dumplings. So today we're going to be doing a hack recipe that I had written that's loosely inspired off of that version, which is, what stands out to me most about it is that it's completely vegetarian. So dan dan mian most traditionally has some form of ground meat involved, usually ground pork, sometimes ground chicken or ground beef. Today we're going to be leaving out that meat entirely and then replacing it with a couple of things. Mainly today we're going to be using some fried shallots as well as some shiitake mushrooms, both of which are relatively common in a dan dan mian, but not necessarily in the context that we're about to do it too. So as always, as with pretty much every recipe that we do on stream, there's a recipe video that already exists that lives over on my YouTube channel. So if you're trying to cook what we're cooking, those are generally pretty useful to bookmark because they move a little bit slower and they don't quite tangent as much as I do. So those are useful to check out if you're trying to take a shot at what we're cooking today. So if you haven't checked out the YouTube channel yet, definitely hop over there next and check out what's going on over there. That's also where that stream behind me is going, so this computer behind me, that's going to our YouTube channel. So in addition to all of those recipe videos, you can also find the full schedule of live streams. So the folks who are watching over on YouTube already knew a couple weeks ago that we'd be doing this one because it was in the schedule. So, if you haven't yet, definitely check out the YouTube channel. That's over on youtube.com/WooCanCook. Cool. So as with pretty much every recipe that we do, I'm starting off, this is 5 cloves of crushed and minced garlic, which we are going to give a real good crush with the flat side of my knife, like so. And then usually after, you can actually see already that this garlic is pretty much coming apart already. So we don't really need to do a fine mince, really. I'm just doing it rough chop at this point. And that's pretty much all you got to do after that. It's going to do most of the work is going to be done by that real good smack. Sarah, yeah, Sarah, hey, the view is much better over on YouTube. Yeah, I think it just, like, generally it looks better, especially on desktop. That's what I've heard. But also the cameras are nicer, the microphone's better. It's just generally better. And I think it doesn't have as much latency either, so. Cool. Next up, this is going to be about an inch. This looks like about an inch of ginger, which we're going to peel with the back of a spoon. Not the front of a spoon, but we're going to be using this dull side of a spoon here. This is really useful if you're peeling a lot of ginger. It's actually been super useful when I do like prep work for in the kitchens because you can do a lot of ginger at once without being like super careful about chipping your finger. So you can see I'm actually grazing part of my finger right now. If I was doing that with a potato peeler, it would have definitely cut my hand already because potato peelers are really sharp. But with the flat of a spoon, if you do it with the flat of a spoon, you're not going to risk shaving parts of your finger off, which I find really, really useful. So, very useful. If you haven't yet, definitely try that trick with the spoon. It's very useful. You can also go a lot faster because you don't have to worry about cutting yourself. So I'm going to do, we're going to start off with a large dice. So we're going slices down the center like so. And then straight down. And if we stopped here, you could call this essentially a large dice. But what we're going to do is we're going to line it up and run our knife through it. I forget to do this a lot when I fine mint stuff, but anytime that for safety reasons, we always want to extend our fingers outward like this. And that's basically ensuring that so you don't tuck your fingers in like that, and you can kind of risk chopping your finger off, which is not great. Fun, useful safety tips. Alright, and there's our ginger. So we're going to set these two elements aside. These are going to be the very first two things that go into our wok fry. We're going to often see me referring to these two elements as the aromatics of our wok fry, specifically for the reason that we're looking for their aromatic qualities. Lucy, oh, you're obsessed with the Feel It Still, yeah. Yeah, the Feel It Still remix is a fun one. That was actually the very first remix that I recorded during COVID, and it was purely out of boredom and not knowing what else to do with my life. So yeah, that's a fun one. Also, the version on Spotify features a friend of mine. Her name is Elisa, and she's a really talented vocalist. It does not have the original stem because it's really hard to get original stems released on Spotify. It actually costs quite a bit of money. So we re-recorded it with my friend Elisa, and then now it's just a cover. So up next, sorry, I told you that I tangent a lot. Up next, this is the whites of my green onions. So as you see, I just separated them, so I'm just chopping up the white parts here. These are really useful to set aside for your wok fry because they are a little bit more durable. We could also, and I have in many cases, use them as a garnish, but we would probably want them to be sliced a little bit thinner because they're pretty abrasive when eaten raw. They're essentially like raw onions, which is not something that you necessarily want to bite into. So what I like to do is set those whites aside and then use them for the wok fry, which means that they're going to get cooked. The greens, these leafy bits that we're about to chop up, these are a little bit more delicate, so what they're very useful for is to chop them really thinly. And then we're going to save these as a garnish. They also look really pretty because they're so colorful. So I'm chopping these up very thinly on a bias. So anytime that we're chopping green onions or anything really delicate, especially, we want to use a back slice, which is essentially pulling back on the knife. So if we were chopping normally, that would be pushing downward like so. This is a little bit more abrasive, and it's going to like sort of do more damage to the cell structure of things that are really delicate like this. So what we want to do is this back slice where we're just pulling backward on the knife like so. And it's a little bit more gentle. It's kind of a weird, it takes a second to kind of figure out how to do it. Especially takes a second to figure out how to do it quickly. But I find is once you figure out how to do it, it's a useful technique to know how to do for anything that's really, really delicate, like things like chives. I honestly can't think of what else I would use a back slice for right now. Cool. So that's our green onions. We have those separated. Next up is going to be a single shallot. I kind of wish I had more shallots, but it'll probably be fine. I'm going to do is slice this up. I'm going to go for relatively large slices. So what we're going to do today, in the original recipe, so if you're following the original recipe, I deep fried these, which was really interesting and difficult to do. I don't love the idea of deep frying because my favorite part, I guess the real reason that I don't love the idea of deep frying these shallots is because my favorite part about this recipe is how simple and easy it is to do. Probably if I wasn't talking so much, I could probably cook this in like maybe 15 minutes. The deep fry, it adds a little bit more time to it because you have to wait for the fryer to heat up, and then you have to navigate the fryer oil. It just kind of adds a whole bunch of time. It makes things a little bit harder, and I don't necessarily think that the reward that you get out of it is all that worth it. So what we're going to do today, instead of that deep fry, is I'm just going to give these a slice, and we're going to fry them up in the wok fry, which is still going to be good. It's not going to be as good, but it'll be all right. The main reason that we did it in the deep fry is because in the original recipe we did it in that deep fry is because the original version, the one that it's inspired by, from Good to Eat, it has them deep fried, and I actually think that they like prep cook them deep fried. I don't think that they fry them that on the spot. So I'm very thinly slicing these shallots. At this point, very, very important to make sure that your knife is super sharp. It's really hard to cut a shallot if you don't have a sharp knife. Like so. So there's our shallot. So I'm going to give those a little bit of separation. You love the cutting board. Oh, thank you. Yeah. I love this cutting board. I think it's really pretty. That's one of my favorite parts about it, actually, is that it looks really nice. But my other favorite, maybe more importantly, favorite part about this cutting board is that it has grips on the bottom. It's really useful. Look at it. It has these nice grips on the bottom, which keep the board from slipping too much. The downside to the grips is that you can't flip the board over and use the other side. So I have never actually chopped on the other side of this cutting board because that's where the grips are. So very useful if you ever have a cutting board that doesn't have grips on it. What you do is you use one side for veggies, then you flip it over, probably wipe it off, and then flip it over and you can use the other side for raw stuff, like chicken, stuff like that. You can't really do that with this cutting board because you can't cut on the other side. But I love the grips on the bottom. It keeps the board from sliding around. It kind of just holds the thing in place. Whereas otherwise, if we didn't have that, I'd probably have to do something to keep the board in place. By the way, if you don't have grips on the bottom of your cutting board, the best solution is just get a dish towel, any kind of towel. You can use a paper towel even, and get it a little bit damp, and then stick it underneath the cutting board, and that will keep it in place, keeps it from sliding around. Very useful. All right. Next up, I'm going to hydrate some shiitake mushrooms here. So we could take a look real quick. These are the shiitake mushrooms that I'm working with today. About 6 of them. It's about 6, yeah. So real quick, let's take a look at these shiitake mushrooms because they're pretty interesting. A couple of things to note about these shiitake mushrooms because these come from a boutique shiitake or mushroom shop here in Chinatown. The first thing, most importantly, is that they don't have stems. If you're working with most shiitake mushrooms that you come across, they will still have that stem attached. That stem gets super chewy. We generally don't want to be eating that stuff because it's like kind of hard to bite into. The other and more important, a really important aspect about these shiitake mushrooms you notice is that they're really, really thin. So you can take a look, see how thin they are. That means that they really quickly. So these ones will probably take about 5 minutes. We're basically going to pour boiling water over it, and then we're going to make our sauce. And then by the time we finish, we'll be hydrated, which is really useful. I also think that they're a little bit more flavorful. If you're working with like thicker shiitake mushrooms, they're going to have a lot more trouble to rehydrate. So you will have to like wait maybe like 20, 25, maybe even 30 minutes sometimes for them to fully rehydrate. So if you're working with thicker shiitake mushroom, I always recommend start hydrating them a lot earlier. Maybe it should be even like the first thing that you do. Sometimes when I have thicker shiitake mushrooms, I'll even hydrate those before I even start the live stream because it takes that long to hydrate. So. Do I use a whetstone? Yeah, good question, Alice. So what I use, where's my whetstone? So I have a couple of whetstones. This is the main one that I use. And this one is 1,000 and 6,000. So it's very useful when you're looking for a whetstone. You could get like really expensive whetstones. This one's not that expensive. I think it's like $30. But what I love about this whetstone is that it has 2 different grits. So one side is 1,000, the other side is 6,000. So I usually do some sharpening on the 1000 side, and then I'll flip it over and we'll do some sharpening on the 6000 side. I also have this second whetstone, which is has been pretty useful, but I haven't used it in a long time. This is I think this is a 200 or 300 grit. I think this side is 200 and I think this side is like 500 or something like that. This whetstone is really useful for if you come across a knife that's chipped. This is a really useful grit to have because you can like take out like chips in a knife. Reason I bought that whetstone is because I came across this really nice Westhoff knife, and it had a huge chunk of it that had been chipped out. I got it for like $1 or something, and I just got that whetstone and took that chip out, and now I have this nice sushi knife, which is really useful. Well, don't use it very often. But yeah, generally for general purposes, we want whetstones that are like going to be a little bit finer grit. 1000 and 6000 tends to be like the sweet spot for me, but I know other people that have like 1000, they'll have like a 3000 and a 6000. If you want to do a lot of sharpening, you can go in between those grains or grits. Cool. All right, next up, so while our mushrooms are hydrating, I'm going to set up our sauce base here. So if you come across lots of other shiitake or lots of other dandan noodles that you'll come across, you will see this stuff dumped straight into the wok. So lots of times the way that you'll see a dandan noodle assembled is you'll have, there will be a sauce and it will be assembled, but it will be assembled literally in the bowl that you're going to be eating out of. And I think my theory is the reason for that is because dandan noodles originate from the culture of street food. So we're trying to cook it on the street where there's not a lot of counter space. So they're eliminating things that like extra dishes. So there's no prep bowls like this. So very useful. The way that they assemble it is they're essentially putting it into the bowl that you're eating out of, the one that they're going to give you when you're eating, and then the noodles go on top of that sauce. And then what you do when you get it is you toss it together. So I don't necessarily love that concept because it kind of results in a lot of like inconsistent results. So what I like to do is I like to assemble this in the wok. So I'm going to assemble my sauce off heat, and then we're going to put it into the wok, and we're going to toss things together in the wok itself. So I'm going to start off. This is going to be 2 tablespoons of sesame paste. And what's really tricky about sesame paste, it kind of has the texture of peanut butter, is that it's really, really thick, and it's really, really paste-like, obviously, because it's a paste, which means that this stuff will for sure clump up with everything that goes in it. So first thing that we're going to do before we assemble our sauce is dissolve and break down this sesame paste in a little bit of stock. So today I'm using chicken stock, but if you're trying to keep it vegetarian, you could just use veggie stock. That will work too. Or if you don't have either of those, you could totally just use water too. That would work. Marco, you don't know the sharpening technique? Yeah, I can definitely talk more about that. So if you're not familiar, so a whetstone is a stone, obviously. They look like this. We could talk about it really quick. They look like this. Mine is dry right now because I'm not sharpening anything. But what you'll generally do is you'll take the stone and then you'll submerge it under water. Usually I use like a big old Tupperware box and I'll soak it underwater for about like 5-10 minutes. And the general idea is that the stone itself is porous. I don't know a lot about knife sharpening techniques, by the way, so I'm just going to tell you what I do know. But what happens is the stone itself is porous, so it takes on water. So then we sharpen our knife using the whetstone, generally at I think 33 degrees, so something like this, and we pull our knife back like so. It's the same technique that it comes from Japanese knife making, so I'm pretty sure it's how they sharpen like samurai swords and stuff. It's the same technique. Probably also like here in the States at least, maybe the more common or like the in vogue technique for sharpening knives. Also like Japanese knives are in vogue right now. So that's like the technique that I see most often is going to be whetstone sharpening, but also like in my opinion probably the most effective technique unless you own like a knife, like a wheel grinder. Yeah, generally speaking, what I always recommend is that if you don't have a whetstone, or if you don't have a whetstone, I always recommend the first thing that you should get is a good whetstone. Even before you buy a good knife, get a good whetstone because it's going to help you get that knife nice and sharp. But also the other thing that I always recommend is if you haven't ever gotten your knife sharpened professionally, get it sharpened professionally. It's going to change your life. Please mix the sesame paste in the jar before using it. Yeah, it doesn't really mix. It's also one of the things that I don't like about that sesame paste. So that it kind of has this quality about it that's very similar. Where did it go? It's kind of similar to organic peanut butter. So you could take a look. On the top of this sesame paste is all of the sesame oil, which is also actually really useful because you can use that sesame oil. It's basically just like toasted sesame oil. And I've actually used it when I forget to buy sesame oil. But there's nothing that I can do. There's no way of getting it to re-homogenize, I guess. And it really bugs me too. But I don't think there's anything that we can do. There's no way. No amount of stirring is gonna fix it. So, it's also the reason why I don't like organic peanut butter either. But here we are. So what I like to do is I'm going to give it, I switched out my spoon for a fork, and then we're basically, it's kind of like whisking the eggs, as we're basically just trying to break up these large clumps, because we don't want these clumps to end up in our noodles. Yeah, skimming the oil off of the peanut butter tahini. I kind of don't like doing that either, because you kind of want that oil, otherwise you're just going to have like really dry tahini or sesame oil. It's generally it hasn't been too much of a problem for me until I get to the bottom of the jar. Then it gets really, really dry. But yeah, I generally I don't love just removing that oil. Sometimes I'll skim it and then use it for basically it's essentially just sesame oil. So you could use that if you forget sesame oil. Most of the time I'll buy sesame oil independently, but yeah, definitely the fact that it gathers that oil on top is a really big pet peeve of mine. And if anybody knows a good way to get that to stop happening, please tell me. But definitely no amount of stirring that I have ever done with that sesame paste ever fixes it. All right, so that's our sesame paste. We have mostly a liquid form. There's still a few clumps, but that's going to be okay. And then what we're going to do is add the remainder of our wet ingredients to this. But very important, before we did anything else, we started off by breaking up those clumps. Otherwise, we have things clumping up with the clumps, which is not great. So that's 4 tablespoons of soy sauce, followed by, this is going to be 2 tablespoons? Yeah, 2 tablespoons of rice vinegar. And finally, 2 tablespoons of Shaoxing which might even be optional in this particular case because we have that rice vinegar. But I do think that it adds a little something. Then next up is going to be 1 tablespoon of brown sugar. If you don't have brown sugar, you could just use plain old sugar. That will work fine too. I like using brown sugar in cooking most of the time because it's brown sugar. If you're not familiar, it's essentially sugar that's cooked in molasses. So you get a little bit more of a complex quality of sweetness that comes with it. Then finally, last up, this is going to be 2 tablespoons of Laogan Ma or chili crisp oil. Which we need more of. Let's fill this jar. All right. Chili crisp oil, if you're not familiar with it, it's essentially red chili flake that has been slow cooked in oil. Usually, I believe, done in coconut oil. I think it's done in soybean oil, actually. And then it has this quality where the capsaicin from the chili crisps release into the oil, and then you get this really nice fragrant oil that results from it. I believe the original version that we're hacking right now from Good to Eat Dumpling does not use the chili crisps. I think they just use the oil. But I actually love the chili crisps. They're my favorite parts, so we're going to use it. All right, so this is our sauce base. If we were doing this, how you would do it in a street food setting, we would put this into the finished bowl and then put our cooked noodles right on top, and that would literally be the thing that you serve. So there would just be like, basically like plain noodles sitting on top of a bed of this, essentially. And then what you would do is you would order that from a night market, and then you would take it to wherever you're sitting, usually on the sidewalk or something, and then you toss it together, and that usually, over the course of the time that you're eating it, it becomes more and more paste-like, because it starts tightening up a little bit more as you sort of like eat the noodles, but it starts off a little bit more soupy. I have always found that I've had a lot of trouble getting the noodles to sort of like coat properly when I do that. So what I like to do is I like to do this, the combination of the sauces on heat, so usually in the wok. And I find that works a little bit better for me. All right, last up, before we head over to the stove, we're going to slice up these shiitakes, which you'll notice are nice and hydrated. They're in big old plump noodles, or big old plump mushrooms now. Very useful. They have hydrated in about 5 minutes, which make them really useful when they're super thin like this. But again, if you are using the thicker stuff, you want to make sure and give that a lot more time. Usually, when I use the thick stuff, that takes at least like 20-25 minutes at least. I'm going to slice these in large strips. I also like doing it diced, but diced could also work too. But I like doing the large strips though today. I'm just feeling it. If you're following the original recipe, I don't think that the shiitake mushrooms are in the original recipe. So, but I do love adding these. I feel like this is a good ad-lib, and I think it's going to work. So there's our shiitake. How did they get plump? Oh yeah, Loki let us, no worries, yeah. So what we did is, so shiitake mushroom, they start off looking dry, like this. There it is. So this is a dry shiitake mushroom. I usually just have a whole bag of it. They look like this. And you can get these at a lot of like mushroom markets, or most Chinatown markets will have this stuff. And then what we did is we just soaked it in a little bit of water, so boiling water. And that usually, so the thin ones, that take about 5-10 minutes. The thicker ones, probably closer to 20-25 minutes. What I was saying is, if you're using those thicker ones, definitely give it a little bit more time to rehydrate. Otherwise, you're going to be chopping like dry mushrooms still, which is not fun. Also, dry shiitake mushrooms are really hard and kind of dangerous to chop because the knife starts slipping, which is like, that's the one territory I usually, when I talk about knife technique, when your knife starts slipping, that's when you're probably going to cut yourself. So I hate when that happens. Where's my mortar pencil? I lied. Two more things. One more thing? Two more things. First up, or the second to last thing that we're doing here, this is a bit of Szechuan peppercorn. So if you've ever had Szechuan food of any kind and it's spicy, this is probably the thing that you will associate most with Szechuan food, is Szechuan peppercorn. So what I always say is, lots of times when I see Szechuan food on the menu, I often see it referred to with things like numbing beef or numbing tofu, things like that. You see the word numbing thrown around a lot in reference to Szechuan food. And that's generally referring to the quality that you get from these peppercorns, because it has this quality about the capsaicin in it that causes your mouth to go numb a little bit, which is really pleasant, I guess. I guess it's a thing that Szechuan, you come across a lot in a lot of Szechuan food. I think it's really nice and pleasant. Some people think that it's a little bit overwhelming. So go easy on it. If you don't like spicy stuff, definitely go easy on it. And especially if you have never used it before, go easy on it, because it can open a recipe pretty quickly. The last thing that I'm doing today. right, last up we're going to be working with, so what we're looking at today are these really nice handmade noodles that I happen to be able to find at the grocery stores next to me. If you can't get your hands on fresh made chow fun or lo mein, depending on where you're looking, I always recommend you can also get the packaged stuff, so you can find the stuff freeze dried. That's always really useful to have in the pantry because it's actually pantry stable once it's freeze dried. So you could keep it in the pantry, and then that makes, once you have that pantry stable noodles, you can basically make this whole dish from things in the pantry, which is my favorite part about this dish, is that it's so pantry friendly. So if you don't know what else to cook, this is an easy one to have in your back pocket. If you are able to find these noodles, I find that they're a lot more tasty than those pantry stable ones, because they're a little bit more chewy and just generally like better quality noodle. But also, if you can't find any kind of Chinese noodles, Chinese or not, what I also recommend is you can use just plain old spaghetti. Also works just fine too. I'm just going to use all of this. This might be too many noodles, but I was about to measure out. We were going to do 12 ounces, but this actually might be too many noodles, but I might set them aside. I hate when recipes do this, but the recipe that I had written calls for 12 ounces of noodles, which I hate when recipes do that because it means that you're going to have a random 4 ounces of noodles set aside. But I actually think that 16 ounces of noodles is going to be too much, so I am breaking my own rule, and we're going to use... I'm actually going to use all of these, and then I think what's going to happen is that I'm just going to have some noodles left over that don't go into the wok, which is fine. But I don't know what else to do with a bunch of random noodles. I don't know what to do with 4 ounces of extra noodle, so... This will just go in first. Cool. So that's our noodles. Let's head over to the stove. Now we're ready to cook. Should we do the noodles first? Yeah, let's do the noodles first. I'm talking to myself. Cool. So I'm actually going to switch out my wok over here for a pot of water. And the first thing that we're going to do today is we're going to boil our noodles. So what's really tricky about the noodles that we're using, which is the point I'm watching it boil in a pot of water, we can take a look at our noodles. So as you probably will have noticed, the noodles that we're using today, they're fresh made noodles. So these are hand rolled, and they're also very, very fresh. So they haven't been freeze dried. So you can see that they are very pliable, bendy. They're basically cooked already. Well, not cooked already, but they're a lot fresher than if you were working with, say, like a freeze-dried spaghetti or a fettuccine, which takes like closer to like 10-12 minutes in a boiling pot of water. These particular noodles, they're going to be a lot more delicate, maybe a little bit more similar to if you've ever had like hand-rolled Italian noodles or hand-rolled spaghetti. Those are going to be a lot more delicate, which means that these are going to take a lot less time. So usually when I cook these, I go for about 2 minutes on the dot. So to that end, what I like to do before we start cooking the noodles is I like to be as accurate as possible with how we cook the noodles. So before we start cooking, what I like to do is set up a quick ice bath, which is very useful because what it's essentially going to do is halt our cooking time, which is really, really useful. Anytime that you're working with something that cooks in 2 minutes, we generally want to be as accurate with when we stop cooking. So we always want to be, anytime that we're cooking something that cooks in 2 minutes, we want to be conscious of carryover cooks. So with noodles, this happens a lot because once you pull those noodles out of the wok or out of the boiling water, they're going to continue to cook because they have residual heat. So generally, if you're cooking something that has a cook time of 2 minutes, it will probably continue to cook for at least 30 seconds, maybe even more. In a lot of things, that carryover cook is not going to be super critical because if you're cooking something that cooks in 10 minutes, it's not going to be super critical if it carryover cooks by a half minute or so. But if you're cooking something that literally cooks in 2 minutes, that half a minute of carryover cook can absolutely result in overcooking your noodles, which is not super great. So what I like to do is we're setting up an ice bath here. So this is essentially ice and water. And then we're going to cook our noodles for 2 minutes, and then we're going to douse them in this ice water. And that's going to halt our cooking process in its tracks. And it's going to prevent things from overcooking. So let's head over here. So going in here first is our noodles. And then we're going to give this a little bit of a toss. And I'm setting a timer for 2 minutes here. We want to be really accurate, so when we say 2 minutes, we really mean 2 minutes. Not 2 minutes and 15 seconds, not 2 minutes and 20 seconds. We're looking for 2 minutes on the dot. So set a timer, don't forget. Yeah. More noodles is always good. Yeah, I totally agree. I eat lots of noodles. Yeah, I'd rather have leftover noodles than have more. The tricky part is knowing how much to add to the wok. So I do agree with that. What I hate most is when you don't have enough sauce relative to your noodles. So if you have too many noodles relative to the amount of sauce that you have, then you're going to have this dish that's under-sauced, which is never great. So what I always say is I actually am going to end up cooking all 16 ounces of these noodles, but we're probably not going to add all 16 ounces of the noodles. We're probably going to hold back at least to like 2 ounces, maybe 3 ounces or so. And then if it's looking very, very saucy for whatever reason, then we can go and add the rest of it. But what I hate more than anything else in the world is a noodle dish that has too many noodles and not enough sauce. The biggest disappointment that you can have. Yeah. Yeah, don't want to be undersauced. Yeah, exactly. Atlas, yeah, good question. So did I salt the noodle water? So that's something that lots of people ask because it happens in Italian food a lot. The more that you cook at Chinese food, the more that you will come across with that. Salting pasta water actually doesn't happen. Actually, the reason that it doesn't happen more often than not is because reserving pasta water also doesn't happen because it's just not a thing that happens in Chinese food, which I always thought is like really interesting because it's such an iconic and quintessential element to cooking Italian food. But the more Chinese food that I have made, the more that I've discovered it's not really a thing. And the reason for that, what I think is because we're also not using any of the pasta water. So the second and big egregious mistake that I did if we were cooking Italian food is I just dumped all of the pasta water. It just went straight down the drain. And the reason the reason in Italian cooking that you generally will be saving that pasta water is because that pasta water, our lens just fogged up a lot. Is because that pasta water, we're going to be using the starch that's in that pasta water to develop nice creamy sauces. In Chinese food, we don't really do that. We do use things to thicken up sauces, but it's not really done with pasta water. What it's done with usually is like cornstarch. That's generally why you see corn slurries come up. In this particular case, we're not going to be using that either because we're making it from peanut butter or sesame paste, actually, not peanut butter. And that sesame paste is going to be giving us all of our thickness to our sauce. So, but yes, definitely in like Italian food, you see that a lot. The more Chinese food that I have cooked, the more that I've discovered, not really a thing that you do in Chinese food. That's definitely, so I think it's like definitely this very, very prevalent thing that happens in a lot of European cooking in general. But when we're like circling like Asian foods, you generally don't see that happen. So the salting of pasta water, where we're looking as salty as the sea, generally not something that you do in Chinese food. And also that quality. So like where the recipe that's coming out, actually it's coming out tomorrow, we're doing a lapchang carbonara, which is essentially an Italian carbonara that's combined with some Chinese sausage. It's part of the Chinese fusion series that we're kicking off. We reserved almost 2 cups of water, and I think I used almost all of it because it's how you get a creamy carbonara. But in this particular case, we're not going to use any of that pasta water. So thank you for bringing that up because I always thought that's really interesting and really odd. So these are our finished noodles. If we were doing a chow mein, what we would do now is start like seasoning it. So we would usually marinate this with some like dark soy sauce, and then we would go back and par cook these noodles. But what we're gonna do today is actually not do that. And we're going to combine it in the wok, which I have heating up. Yeah, you saw the water. My grandmother will slap you. Yeah, I don't know if she would slap you, but I actually have never like cooked noodles with my grandparents. My grandparents mostly just leaned in towards like stir fries. Yeah, thank you for asking. Cool. Did I roll these noodles myself? I didn't. I was on my to-do list for attempting things to attempt that honestly feel harder than is worth it. It just so happens, so I live here in Oakland, Chinatown. If you happen to be local to the Oakland Bay Area, I got these from Yun Hop, which is on Webster and 8th? Webster and 8th, which is a really, really great noodle spot. They hand roll their own noodles. They're like right in the heart of Chinatown, and it's really, really useful because they also supply these noodles to literally every grocery store within like the 2-mile radius. So I happen to live down the street from a grocery store that's 2 blocks from Yun Hop, and I can find these really, really easily, which is my favorite part. So I don't bother hand rolling my noodles because I can buy them really easily. But I do realize that that's not a luxury that everybody has. What I always say is if you can't get your hands on hand-rolled noodles like this, no pun intended, what I always say is you could use the pantry stuff that's going to be just as good. Well, not just as good, but it's also going to be good. But what I also say is I think one of the dan dan mian recipes, there's a couple of dan dan mian recipes on the YouTube channel now, but one of them I actually did it with fettuccine, so like dried fettuccine, because I had bought these noodles and they started molding, which sucks. So I ended up doing that recipe with dried fettuccine, and it will work out. Is the wok cast iron? No. Today, though, my wok is made out of carbon steel, which I love. I do love a good cast iron wok. Problem with a cast iron wok is that it doesn't react to heat changes very well. What I always recommend is if you're cooking on an induction top, cast iron is going to be the way to go because it's going to that heat retention property of cast iron is going to keep that wok really, really hot, no matter what's happening underneath it. So even though you don't have a fire, the cast iron is going to do all of the work for you. So before I owned a wok, or before I like really started investigating and like buying nice stuff, I just cooked everything in a skillet, a cast iron skillet, and it worked just fine. You'll probably make a little bit more mess, but yeah. So carbon steel, we're going with carbon steel today. Cool. One more time before we start cooking, hello to everyone just tuning in. My name is Wesley. This is Wu Can Cook. If you've never caught one of these streams before, we're here every Tuesday and Thursday at 6:30 PST with new recipes out on my YouTube channel every Friday. So last Friday we did a recipe for tomato egg stir fry, which is part of the breakfast series that we've been doing. This Friday coming up, as in tomorrow, we're kicking off a brand new series that's entirely devoted to weird fusion recipes that are really fun for me. We're doing this Friday coming up, or tomorrow, we're going to be doing a lapchung carbonara, which is what I was talking about earlier, which is essentially a carbonara that has its guanciale, or the pork element, removed. And then we're going to replace it with some pork lapchung, which is a form of Chinese sausage. And then I used a couple extra things. I added some lao gan and some Tianjin peppers. It turned out really, really good, but I also had to do it. I think I did it 3 or 4 times because it's a really weird one to try and do in a wok. So if you're interested in stuff like that, make your way over to the YouTube and check out what's going on over there. We got new recipes out every Friday, and this Friday is going to be that carbonara. Friday after that is we're doing xianbings, which is a Chinese. Xianbing is a Chinese pie. It's a dim sum dish that you get a lot. And then Friday after that, we're doing shumai. Shumai is coming up after that. So lots of fun stuff coming up. And we're also making our way up to 5,000 subscribers by the end of the month. So if you want to help us hit our subscriber goal, hop over and subscribe. Anyway, before we kick things off, so the first thing that I just did, I started heating up our wok on high heat. But I also remembered that what we're about to do is actually cook our shallots, which I don't actually want to do on high heat. I want to do that on medium heat. Otherwise, they're going to start burning. So our goal here today, so we have these really pretty looking purple shallots. But what we really don't want to do is start burning them. So when we go to cook our shallots, we want these to be cooked on medium heat. Otherwise, if we do them on high heat, they're just going to start burning. So I got my wok at medium heat today. We're going to give this a quick toss. And then what we're going to do, so we're not flash cooking these shallots today. We're actually going to be trying to cook them all the way through. So we want these to give up most of their moisture, and we're basically looking for a caramelization at this point. So what that means, in order to make sure that they don't burn, is first off, we want to be on medium heat, but second, and also very important, so we want to be agitating a lot. In order for them to cook down properly, we have to be constantly agitating, otherwise they're going to burn. So the biggest element to shallots is burning, because they contain a lot of sugar. Yeah. So, by the way, if you are following the original recipe, I didn't do this stir fry, this portion. I actually did this in a deep fry, which turned out okay, but I also burnt that part partially too, so not super great. But the main reason that we're skipping that deep fry today is because I find that it takes a little bit longer. It takes a lot longer, which I don't love about this particular recipe, because I always love my favorite part about this recipe is how easy and quick it is, and how pantry friendly it is. If you're trying to do this one and you have to do that deep fry, it kind of adds a lot of cook time. So what I'm doing today is we're just gonna a really quick stir fry. We're basically gonna caramelize some shallots, and that's gonna do it for us. Yeah. So what we're looking for here, anytime that we're cooking shallots, this is also true for onions too. So I'm looking for our shallots to start releasing their liquid, which they're very slowly but gradually doing. The real key to getting your shallots to release that liquid is we have to be on lower heat, so no high heat. We're on medium heat today. But also we want to be constantly agitating it. Because if you forget to agitate, so if you forget to stop moving, or if you stop moving at any point, eventually what's going to happen is they're going to start burning, which is not great. So that's why unattended onions, they often will burn. I'm also going to pull these a little bit early. I personally like my grilled shallots to be a little bit under, because I like them to still be a little bit crispy. But if you really like pulverized caramelized onions, you can go all the way until they turn a deep brown. That's your fancy. I'm going to pull them a little bit early because I like them to be a little bit crispy for my taste. Like right around there. All right, now we're going to start turning up our heat. So I just moved our stove up to high heat. So we're going from medium heat to high heat. So I'm going to let that heat up all the way now. And then we're going to start doing our stir fry. And if you've been following this whole time, I see there's lots of new people following. If you've been following this whole time, you will notice that the rest of this stir fry is going to start happening very, very quickly. Basically, the rest of the thing is going to happen in about 5 minutes or less. And that's because once you're on that really, really high heat, things are going to start cooking really fast. So super important is that once you get to this point in the cook, is that everything else that we've already done needs to already be cooked or already chopped. So we don't want to be chopping garlic or green onions or mushrooms or anything like that. This process that comes from French cooking, you call it mise en place, which is very, very important in wok frying, because if you forget to do it, which I have done on a few occasions, you're probably going to burn something, because you're going to have to stop the heat and then start chopping something, which is never a good thing. Yeah. Ooh, taro root steamed with onions. Yeah, we did. So I did some taro pancakes, which were really tasty. I forget the Chinese name for it. Taro root is super weird. And I've cooked a lot of weird stuff, but taro root is a strange root. It is the way that you find it. So I did a whole recipe about it. And taro root is very weird looking because it's basically a tree log. I had a lot of fun doing it because I have never actually seen what taro root looks like. But But yeah, that's essentially, I forget what it's called. But what I always call it is taro cakes. I forget the Chinese word for it, but yeah, it is on the YouTube channel. Let's see if I can find it. There it is. There's the taro cake, yeah. Yeah, seasoned beautifully. Yeah, I love this wok. I've also been cooking on it for a really long time. I think we're going on 2 years on this wok. I also recently bought a new wok for our kitchen for the commercial kitchen that I work in. I'm not looking forward to seasoning it. All right, let's kick things off. So I'm gonna get some peanut oil into my wok, unless we're out of peanut oil, which we are. Lots of people ask me for good substitutions for peanut oil, which I do all the time. This is a little bit of grapeseed oil. If you don't have grapeseed oil or peanut oil, vegetable oil also works great too. All right, going in first, that's my garlic, then our ginger, and the whites of our green onions. You often see that referred to as the aromatics of our stir fry. Specifically because we're looking for their aromatic quality. So I'm blooming them for about 15 seconds, but what I always say is start using your nose at this point, and pay attention. What does it smell like? When you start smelling garlic and ginger, you're ready to go. Next up, that's my shiitake mushroom going in. Finally, here's our noodle, which again, I'm going to have like 3/4 of this noodle is going to go in, and then I'm going to add my sauce. Maybe we could go a little bit heavier on these noodles. I don't think it's going to be all of them though. Away with them all. Let's go for it. I'm gonna go for it. Yeah, look at that. And that's gonna do it. So very important anytime that we're cooking in carbon steel. The first and most important thing that I always recommend anytime that you finish cooking in it is give it a rinse. So I always say is empty out the wok and then give it a rinse. While the carbon steel is hot, it has this nice non-stick surface that's going on, which is really useful. Number one for cooking, but also number two because it's really easy to clean. You could just give it a quick rinse, everything comes right off. If you're not paying attention or if you're really hungry and you go and sit down, start eating and then come back to that stuff that's all stuck to the wok, it's going to have a lot more trouble getting that thing clean again. And you're going to have to start doing like a lot of scrubbing. You're probably going to have to get some steel wool out even. Not the end of the world, but do yourself a favor. Clean the wok while it's hot and you're going to have a lot less cooking or cleaning time done. That's our wok. All right. If I FedEx them to San Francisco, yeah. Yeah. Well, I should FedEx them to San Francisco. That would be fun. So by the way, for the folks who are watching since the beginning, we went with, so the original recipe that I had written this for calls for 12 ounces. of noodles. We ended up cooking all 16 ounces because I didn't want a random 4 ounces of noodles sitting around. And I actually ended up using them all. When I started cooking them, I originally had said probably not going to use them all, but we used them all. Here we are. So I'm going to finish this with a couple of things. First off is going to be our Sichuan peppercorn. So if you've ever worked with Sichuan peppercorn, they have these leaves to them, so we can take a look. All of that white stuff, that's stuff that we don't want to be eating. So what we're looking for is all of this ground stuff down here. All of that stuff, we want that. So if you don't really care, I generally don't care. But if you're really trying to like work out presentation, you can pass it through a sieve, and that's the stuff that we're looking for. I have heard from some friends say that they don't like it because it gets like stuck in their teeth, which I just don't care. But if you're really a stickler for it, I know that the original version that comes from Good to Eat Dumplings, they pass it through a sieve. So you can absolutely do that if you want. The next and maybe most important part that we're finishing with, these are our grilled shallots. And finally, the last thing that we're finishing with, I'm running out of counter space. Here's our green onions. Is the recipe posted? Yeah. Let me make sure we post that. Here's the recipe if you're looking for that. Sometimes these links don't show up on Reddit. But yeah, the recipe, if it doesn't show up, it's on my YouTube channel for sure. So I mentioned this earlier, but my favorite part about this noodle dish is that it's really quick and easy to make. So we're coming up on, yeah, about an hour. But that's because I was talking so much. When I'm not talking, usually I can make this dish in probably about like 15, maybe 20 minutes. Probably the longest thing that takes to cook is the noodles. But everything else is really, really quick and easy to make. So my favorite part about this dish is how easy and quick it is to make. Also how pantry friendly it is. Literally the only thing that's fresh are these chives, which you could technically leave out if you really wanted to. Oh, yeah, I forgot. Are my sesame seeds. So I love how pantry friendly this noodle dish is. And it's one of my favorite ones to break out when I don't know what else to cook. That's a pinch of sesame seeds too, that I forgot. Taste it, yeah. I don't want to mess up this. It looks so pretty. I'll taste it from over here. Yeah, super. Like a really nice mellow heat that's coming from the Szechuan peppercorns and that laugan, but also like really thick and creamy sauce that's coming from that sesame paste, which is super interesting thing to like come across, like how thickness and like thick sauces are developed without pasta water, which I always thought was really interesting. Like the more that I've like gotten into Chinese noodles, the more that I discovered is that they're like dramatically different from how Italian noodles are cooked. And also like very different from how like Thai noodles are cooked. So the more that you investigate Asian noodles, the more that you will discover that like that paradigm of that things that are like held as like holy and like really, really important to cooking noodles that comes from like Italian food don't necessarily hold when you go to other places, which I always thought was really interesting because most of the time, if you're like me, when you cook noodles, you're mostly referring to how Italian noodles are cooked because that's where like the noodle mecca comes from. But actually, when you go across the pond and you go to like more of like the Chinese stuff and also like a lot of the Taiwanese stuff, you don't see a lot of those techniques come up, which is really interesting. Yeah, cool. Thanks everyone. My name is Wesley. This is Wu Can Cook. If you're looking for the recipe, that lives over on my YouTube channel already, which is at youtube.com/WuCanCook. If you're watching on Reddit, that's the YouTube channel at the bottom of the screen. If you're watching on YouTube, this thing should stop shutting off. If you're watching on YouTube, it's the channel you're already on. I don't know. There's nothing that I can do about this camera. It shuts off every 30 minutes, so there's nothing I can do. We have new recipes coming out every Tuesday and Thursday. We have new video. We're live streaming every Tuesday and Thursday at 6:30 with new recipes out over every Friday. So this Friday coming up, I'm really excited. I'm kicking off a new series, which is entirely dedicated to Chinese fusion dishes. And the first thing that we're going to be doing in that series is a recipe that someone from Reddit actually sent to me, and that I sort of like redeveloped it and adapted it for like something that you can actually like assemble in a wok, which is Italian carbonara. Which, if you're not familiar with carbonara, I'd be really surprised if you're not familiar with carbonara. But a carbonara is essentially an Italian pasta that's cooked, number one, with some form of pork, usually cured pork. Usually, most traditionally, that's guanciale, but if you're here in the States, that's more commonly done with pancetta or bacon, usually. And what it's done is it's rendered bacon fat or pork fat, and then it's cooked and tossed in an egg slurry. And then that Italian paradigm with pasta water comes together, and we use that pasta water and the starch in it to develop a really thick and creamy sauce. What we're going to do in that fusion recipe is basically everything that you would normally do in a carbonara, except we're going to remove that guanciale or pancetta and then replace it with some Chinese lapchang sausage, which is really tasty. I was pretty skeptical when I first saw it, especially when it was first sent to me, because I have never used lapchang in that fashion. And I was pretty skeptical that you would be able to render fat from lapchang, but I attempted it 3 or 4 times, I think, and then kind of like redeveloped and like added a couple things, and then we're gonna put that up. So that's coming up this Friday, tomorrow, which I'm super stoked for. It's really delicious. It's actually one of my favorite pasta dishes right now. And let's see, Friday after that we have a recipe for a xianbing, which is like a Chinese dim sum. I think it's like you'll see it referred to as like a meat pie or like a meat pancake, stuffed pancake, something like that. To me, it's more like a flattened out dumpling, basically, but it's fried. So it's basically a big giant pot sticker that's been flattened and then fried, which is awesome. So that's coming out in next Friday. Friday after that is going to be some shumai. We're going to do some steamed dim sum. Lots of dim sum lately, so lots of stuff like that coming out over on the YouTube channel. So if you haven't checked out the YouTube channel yet, definitely find your way over and check out what's going on over there. Lots of fun stuff coming up every Friday. And what are we cooking next? So let's see. Oh, the next thing that we're going to be cooking, so we're not live streaming this Friday, but next Tuesday we're going to be cooking through that carbonara live. So if you want to see me talk through all of the ways that I fucked that recipe up, and why I had to redo it 3 or 4 times, we're going to be cooking it live, and I'll tell you all about it. So, lots of fun stuff like that coming up. We're working our way up to 5,000 subscribers by the end of the month, so if you want to help us hit our subscriber goal, please hop over and subscribe. If you are not interested, please don't subscribe. I don't know why people do that. And then people yell at me. Cool. What else? Last thing that I'll mention, if you're here in the Bay Area, this one particular recipe that we're cooking today is inspired by a dandan noodle that you can find here in Oakland, which is at a spot called Good to Eat Dumplings on 3rd and Harrison here in Oakland. We're also going to be doing, if you are here local in the Bay Area, we're going to be doing our fried rice pop-up at the Hayward Farmers Market this coming Saturday. So if you are here in the Bay Area, come check it out. That's lots more information about that at wucancook.com/eats. Lots of fun stuff coming up. Cool. All right. Thanks, everyone. I'll see you soon. Bye.
If you think that you don't know, never mind, that you still don't love yourself, no. You can find it from somebody else, no. Everybody's got to go up. Sometimes funny how we shoot the mood. Still, will we find want to be, baby. Oh, wait now, babe. I said everybody wants to be different. They still got dreams, but they don't love me like they used to love it. And I'm reminded of how bad I used to want it. And yes, I still got dreams, but more like a tookie of my 20s, and it's breaking me down. Want to be, baby, yes I am. Do you want to be?